"I'm not happy," she cried, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and despair. I stared at her in disbelief, my heart pounding, and after a long silence, I packed my bag and told her, "Now you can be miserable alone." That was the moment everything in my life shifted, the moment I realized that sometimes love isn't about fixing what's broken, but about walking away before you're broken too. This is the story of how I gave everything to someone who claimed she wanted happiness, only to realize that no matter what I did, it would never be enough, and how leaving her was the only way I found peace. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I remember the exact moment, like it was branded into my memory. The room was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that presses down on your chest until it feels hard to breathe. She stood there, her arms crossed, eyes glossed over with frustration, and then those 3 words came out like a knife. "I'm not happy." It wasn't the first time she had said it, but it was the first time it felt final, like she had been rehearsing it for days, maybe weeks. I felt a rush of emotions, confusion, anger, betrayal, even guilt, as if somehow, despite everything I had sacrificed, despite every late-night conversation, every effort to make her feel secure, I had failed. And yet, deep down, I knew this wasn't about me. It never really had been. To understand how I got here, you need to know where I started. My name is Daniel, and I grew up in a small town outside of Milwaukee. Nothing fancy, nothing glamorous, just the kind of place where neighbors still wave when they see you at the grocery store, and everyone knows when your car breaks down because it's parked on the same corner for 3 days. I had always been someone who believed in stability, in building a foundation before you dared to dream higher. That's why, when I met Vanessa, I thought I had found the missing piece of my puzzle. She was bright, fiery, with a laugh that could fill an entire room, and she looked at me in a way that made me feel like I was worth more than I ever gave myself credit for. She wasn't from around my town. She had grown up in the city, used to faster rhythms, bigger opportunities, louder nights. Maybe that's why I was so drawn to her, because she was everything I wasn't. When we first got together, I believed she was happy. She smiled at my small-town ways, teased me for how seriously I took Sunday morning coffee at the local diner, and even told me she loved the quiet life I could offer. I thought I was giving her something different from the chaos she had been used to, but now, years later, standing in our living room with her eyes full of disappointment, I realized maybe she never wanted different. Maybe she only wanted temporary comfort, a safe harbor before she sailed off again. And yet, I was the one who stayed anchored, believing she would settle into the life we were building. Her words that night weren't just an expression of unhappiness. They were an indictment of everything I thought I was. When someone you love tells you they aren't happy, no matter how much you've done, it forces you to question your own worth. I could still see the birthday surprises I had planned, the vacations I had saved for, the long hours at work I had endured, just so we could pay off our debts sooner. Every sacrifice replayed in my mind like a cruel highlight reel, ending with the same conclusion. None of it mattered. And when she stood there waiting for me to respond, to beg her to stay, or to apologize for failing her, something inside me shifted. For years I had been carrying the weight of her moods, her dissatisfaction, her endless comparisons to lives she saw online, to people who seemed freer, happier, richer. I thought love meant absorbing that weight, protecting her from the storms in her head. But love isn't supposed to be one person carrying everything while the other complains about the load. So when I said, "Now you can be miserable alone," it wasn't anger speaking. It was clarity. It was the realization that no matter how much love I gave, no matter how carefully I tried to hold our fragile bond together, I couldn't make her happy if she wasn't willing to find happiness within herself. And so, I packed. Slowly, methodically, almost numb. She didn't stop me. She just watched, maybe shocked, maybe relieved. I don't know, and maybe I'll never know. All I remember is that for the first time in years, my steps felt lighter, like I wasn't walking on eggshells anymore. But don't mistake me. It wasn't triumph. It was heartbreak, raw and jagged, because walking away from someone you love is never easy, even when you know it's the only choice left. Still, that night was the beginning of something I couldn't see yet, something I would only understand later, that sometimes losing someone is the only way to stop losing yourself. Before that night when everything shattered, life had a rhythm, a routine that gave me comfort and purpose. I was a project manager at a construction company, not exactly glamorous work, but it was steady, reliable, and allowed me to build a future I could be proud of. My days started early, usually before dawn, with the sound of my alarm pulling me from the warmth of our bed. I'd make coffee, sometimes for both of us, if she hadn't stayed up too late scrolling on her phone, and head out to meet the crews. There was something grounding about watching plans on paper take shape into walls, floors, and buildings that people would one day use. I liked knowing that my hands, in some small way, left a mark on the world. When I came home, I wanted the same kind of grounding, the same sense of purpose. That's what I thought I had with Vanessa, or at least what I believed in the beginning. Vanessa was different from anyone I had ever dated before. She was bold, outspoken, and had a restless energy that made you feel like standing still was a crime. She thrived in social settings, charmed entire rooms without effort, and always seemed to be reaching for something just beyond her grasp. In those early months, I admired that about her. She made me feel alive in ways I hadn't experienced before, like I was suddenly part of something bigger and more exciting than my small-town life had prepared me for. She would drag me to concerts, art shows, late-night diners, 2 towns over. And though I was more of a homebody, I found myself saying yes because being with her felt like an adventure. I told myself that was love. That willingness to step outside your comfort zone because someone makes the world brighter. When we first moved in together, I thought it was the start of the life we had both dreamed about. We rented a modest 2-bedroom apartment in the suburbs. Nothing fancy, but close enough to the city to keep her satisfied and far enough away to give me the quiet I needed. I painted the walls myself, assembled the furniture, and even carved out a little space in the living room where she could paint, because she said art was her passion. She promised she would use the time to build her portfolio, maybe even start selling her work. I believed in her. I believed in us. Every time she talked about wanting more, I reassured her that we'd get there together, that all it took was patience, hard work, and loyalty. But looking back now, I see the imbalance that was there from the very beginning. I was building a foundation, brick by brick, while she was chasing clouds, reaching for something fleeting. I don't say that with bitterness, just honesty. I needed stability. She craved excitement. I wanted roots. She wanted wings. At first, those differences felt complementary, like we completed each other. But in reality, we were setting ourselves up for a collision. My family had always taught me that relationships were about perseverance. My parents had been married for 30 years, and though their life wasn't perfect, they had a partnership built on shared values. I wanted that too, and I believed Vanessa wanted it with me. When I introduced her to my family, she played the part perfectly. She laughed at my dad's old jokes, helped my mom set the table, and even took my little niece out for ice cream. Everyone told me I was lucky, that she was a keeper, and I believed them. Because when you're in love, you only see what you want to see. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I never noticed how often she compared our life to others. Us. She'd scroll through Instagram, sighing at vacation photos, designer clothes, and couples who seemed to have it all. At first, I brushed it off as harmless envy, something everyone felt from time to time. But slowly, those comparisons became sharper, directed at me, at us. Why can't we travel more? Why don't we have a nicer car? Why do we live here instead of closer to the city? They were small questions at first, but I started to hear the dissatisfaction underneath them. I worked overtime to give us stability, yet somehow it felt like none of it ever measured up. Still, I held on to hope. I told myself she just needed time to adjust, that she'd come to appreciate the steady life I was offering. I thought that if I just kept giving, kept showing her loyalty, she'd eventually see the value in what we had. That's the thing about people like me. We believe love can fix everything, even when the cracks are deeper than we realize. And for a while, I convinced myself that she was happy enough, that we were building something together. Our evenings were a mix of contradictions. Some nights were warm and tender. She'd curl up beside me on the couch, head on my shoulder, and tell me she couldn't imagine life without me. On those nights, I felt like the luckiest man alive. Other nights, she'd withdraw completely, scrolling endlessly on her phone, or snapping at me for small things, like forgetting to pick up her favorite creamer or being too tired to go out on a Friday night. I never knew which version of her I was going to come home to, but I accepted it because I loved her. I told myself relationships weren't supposed to be easy, that ups and downs were normal. What I didn't realize was that the downs were slowly becoming the norm. In the setup of my life with Vanessa, everything looked fine on the surface. Stable job, decent apartment, a partner who turned heads when we walked into a room. But beneath that surface, cracks were forming, small and subtle at first, but dangerous all the same. And while I didn't see it clearly then, those cracks were only going to widen, until the foundation I had worked so hard to build would no longer hold. It all started on a chilly October evening 3 years ago, the kind where the air feels crisp enough to wake you up but not yet harsh enough to make you uncomfortable. I had gone with a couple of coworkers to a small art gallery downtown, not because I was particularly interested in art, but because one of the guys had a cousin displaying her work, and he insisted it would be a fun night out. I almost didn't go. I was tired from a long week at the construction site, and all I wanted was to stay home with a beer and watch the game. But something told me to push myself. Maybe because I was tired of the monotony. Or maybe because some part of me knew I needed a change. That was the night I met Vanessa. She stood near a display of abstract paintings, her hair falling in loose waves around her shoulders, her laughter echoing louder than anyone else's in the room. She had this magnetism, the kind of energy that made you notice her even if you weren't trying to. I remember being introduced through my coworker's cousin, and the moment our eyes met there was this spark, as cliché as it sounds. She teased me almost immediately about how uncomfortable I looked in the gallery, as if she could read me like a book within seconds. And maybe she could, because before long, we were talking like we had known each other for years. She told me she was an aspiring artist, someone who wanted to make a career out of her creativity, but felt trapped in the corporate job she had taken to pay the bills. I told her about my small-town roots, my steady job, and how I was more of a routine kind of guy. We laughed at how different we were, and yet it felt like the differences pulled us together rather than pushed us apart. That night, after the gallery, a group of us went out for late-night coffee. I remember sitting across from her in the booth, the cheap fluorescent lights reflecting in her eyes as she animatedly told a story about sneaking into concerts when she was a teenager. She was bold, mischievous, and utterly unapologetic about who she was. I was captivated, not just by her beauty, but by the way she seemed to live without fear, without the hesitation that often held me back. By the end of the night, she asked for my number before I could ask for hers, and I left with a strange, buzzing excitement in my chest. Our relationship began fast and intense. Within a week, we were texting constantly, staying up until 2 or 3 in the morning, even when I had to be up for work by 6. She had this way of making me feel like I was the center of her universe, like every message, every call was proof that I had finally found someone who truly saw me. We went on spontaneous dates, sometimes driving hours just to see a new place or try a new restaurant. She pushed me out of my comfort zone, and at the time, I loved it. It was thrilling, and I told myself that maybe this was the kind of love I had been missing, the kind that sweeps you up and makes you forget the rest of the world. The first few months were golden. She came to visit me at work sometimes, bringing lunch and joking with my crew like she had known them forever. On weekends, we explored the city, went to concerts, and spent lazy mornings tangled in bed, talking about our dreams. She told me she wanted to one day have her own studio, that she hated the grind of 9-to-5 life, and that she envied people who chased passion over security. I told her I wanted a home, stability, maybe kids one day, and she smiled and said, "We'll make it work." I believed her. I believed that two people with different visions could still paint the same picture if they loved each other enough. Looking back, there were already signs that our paths weren't aligned, but I didn't see them for what they were. I thought her restlessness was just part of her charm, something that balanced out my grounded nature. When she got frustrated about her job, I would comfort her, promising that things would get better. When she hinted that she wished we could travel more or have nicer things, I brushed it off as casual daydreaming. I didn't realize those were seeds of discontent being planted, seeds that would one day grow into the declaration that she wasn't happy. But in the beginning, all I saw was the good. She made me feel alive in a way I hadn't before. She gave me stories to tell, memories that sparkled with excitement. Like the time we drove to Chicago on a whim just to try deep dish pizza because she had seen a food blogger rave about it. Or the night we danced in the rain after getting caught in a storm walking back from a concert, soaking wet but laughing like kids. These were moments that made me believe we had something rare, something worth fighting for. When we decided to move in together after just 8 months, I didn't hesitate. Everyone warned me it was too soon, that we should slow down, but I ignored them. I thought when you knew, you knew. We found that small apartment on the edge of the city, and even though it stretched my budget, I told myself it was worth it to start our life together. The day we moved in, she hugged me tightly and said, "This is the start of forever." I carried those words in my heart like a promise, like proof that we were building something real. In truth, the beginning was intoxicating, the kind of love story people envy from the outside. It was fast, passionate, and full of dreams. I didn't see the cracks forming beneath the surface, didn't realize that what felt like forever to me might only have been a temporary escape for her. But at that time, all I knew was that I was in love, and I believed with every part of me that we were writing the first pages of a story that would last. Those first 2 years with Vanessa had moments that, even now, I sometimes look back on with a bittersweet ache. They were the times when I truly believed we were unstoppable, when I thought we had cracked the code to happiness, when the weight of our differences hadn't yet pulled us apart. Life wasn't perfect, but it was ours, and for a while, that felt like enough. We built routines that made sense in the chaos of our opposing personalities. Saturday mornings were my favorite. I'd get up early, make pancakes, and she'd stumble into the kitchen still in her pajamas, hair messy, eyes half shut, yet she'd smile at me like I was the best part of her day. She'd sit on the counter, swinging her legs while I cooked, telling me about some wild dream she had, or complaining about the latest drama at her job, and I'd listen. Not because I had answers, but because she made even the mundane feel alive. There were trips too, nothing extravagant, but memorable all the same. We drove up north one autumn to see the leaves change, stopping at roadside diners, taking photos of each other with bright orange and red trees in the background. She loved those pictures, posted them online with captions about how lucky she was to have me, and for a brief time I felt seen, validated in a way I didn't often seek but appreciated when it came. On New Year's Eve, we went downtown, dressed up, and celebrated with strangers, kissing under the fireworks like we were the only 2 people in the world. I carried those memories with me like proof that despite the challenges, we were building something real. She had a way of turning ordinary days into something special. Once, after a rough week at work, she surprised me with tickets to see my favorite band, even though she wasn't particularly into their music. She sang along with me anyway, laughing at how passionate I got when the chorus hit. Another time, she organized a surprise birthday party, inviting all my friends and family, decorating the apartment with streamers, balloons, and a cake she had baked herself. I can still remember the look in her eyes when I blew out the candles. Like she was proud of what we had, proud of me. It's easy to dismiss those moments now, given how everything ended. But back then, they were the foundation of my hope. They were the reason I stayed, the reason I kept believing. We shared dreams too late at night when the world was quiet and it felt like nothing could touch us. She talked about wanting to open her own gallery one day, a space where local artists could showcase their work without the pretension of the big city art scene. I encouraged her, told her I'd support her in any way I could, and I meant it. In return, she supported my goals of climbing higher at the construction company, maybe even starting my own firm someday. She would sketch out little mock logos for me, joking about how she'd handle the creative side while I managed the practical. It felt like we were a team, and even though we came from different worlds, we were writing a story together. The good times were also filled with laughter, the kind of laughter that erupts unexpectedly and leaves you breathless. Like the night we tried cooking a new recipe and ended up setting off the smoke alarm, chasing each other around the apartment with dish towels trying to clear the smoke. Or the evening we got caught in a sudden downpour on our way back from the grocery store, running through the rain and collapsing into fits of laughter as we dripped water all over the living room. Those were the nights that made me feel like I was exactly where I was supposed to be, that despite our differences we had something rare and precious. For a while I truly believed she was happy. She said it often enough, whispering it against my chest when we lay in bed, posting photos online with captions about finding my forever and telling her friends how lucky she was. And maybe she meant it, at least in those moments. Happiness isn't always constant. It comes in waves, and I thought we had learned to ride them together. But what I didn't see then was that for Vanessa, the waves of happiness were always followed by undertows of dissatisfaction, pulling her deeper each time. I didn't notice it clearly because I was too busy holding on to the good, convincing myself that as long as we had those golden moments, we could survive anything. One of my favorite memories from those years was a road trip we took to Nashville. Neither of us had been before, and it was one of those impulsive decisions that she thrived on. We spent 4 days exploring music venues, eating barbecue, and talking late into the night in our cheap motel room. On the last night, she grabbed my hand during a street performance, pulling me into the crowd, dancing with me while strangers clapped along. I had never felt more alive, more free, more connected to her. That trip became a story we told over and over again, a reminder of how good we could be together when things aligned. The good times gave me hope. They were the reason I dismissed the small arguments, the mood swings, the hints of dissatisfaction. When she snapped at me for being too tired to go out, I remembered the nights she held me close and told me she loved me. When she rolled her eyes at the idea of staying in on a Friday night, I remembered the road trip to Nashville, the pancakes on Saturday mornings, the birthday party she had thrown for me. Love makes you focus on the best parts, because the alternative, the possibility that it might not last, is too painful to face. So I clung to the good times, telling myself they outweighed the bad, even as the balance quietly began to shift. For those 2 years, I convinced myself that we were building something worth holding on to, that the laughter, the road trips, the quiet mornings, and the shared dreams were enough to cover the cracks. And maybe for a while, they were. Maybe for a while, she believed in it too. But the good times, as beautiful as they were only one side of the coin. On the other side, shadows were forming, and soon they would grow too large to ignore. The first warning signs didn't arrive as explosions or dramatic confrontations. They slipped in quietly, like cracks in the foundation that you don't notice until the whole structure feels unstable. Looking back, I can pinpoint the small moments when the shift began, but at the time, I brushed them aside, convincing myself that every relationship had its rough patches. The first time I felt it was on an ordinary Tuesday night. I had worked late and stopped to grab dinner on my way home, her favorite takeout from the Thai place around the corner. I walked into the apartment with the bag in hand, expecting a smile, or at least a simple thanks, but instead, she barely looked up from her phone. She sighed, set it down, and asked why I didn't think to get sushi instead, because she wasn't in the mood for Thai. It wasn't the comment itself. It was the tone, sharp, ungrateful, as if my effort didn't matter. I laughed it off at the time, told her maybe next time I'd read her mind better, but a small part of me felt stung. Another sign came during one of her friends' parties. We had been invited to a rooftop gathering in the city, and though I was exhausted from the week, I went because I knew it mattered to her. The night was filled with loud music, laughter, and clinking glasses. Vanessa seemed in her element, surrounded by people, glowing under the city lights. But at one point, I overheard her talking to a friend, saying something like, "Sometimes I feel like I settled too soon. I should have experienced more before moving in with someone." She said it casually, almost as if it were a joke, but my stomach dropped. I didn't confront her then. I didn't want to make a scene. Instead, I buried it, telling myself she probably didn't mean it, that maybe I misheard. But I didn't mishear. I had heard the disappointment in her voice, the same disappointment that would grow louder in the months to come. Her restlessness became more obvious over time. She started going out without me more often, claiming she needed girl time or space. At first, I didn't mind. I trusted her, and I thought independence was healthy in a relationship. But the frequency increased, and soon, she was gone 3 or 4 nights a week. When I asked if she wanted me to come along, she'd brush me off with excuses, saying it wasn't my scene, or I wouldn't have fun. What she didn't realize was that it wasn't about the scene. It was about being shut out of her world. She was building a life outside of us, and I was slowly being left behind. Then there were the comparisons. At first they were subtle, almost playful. She'd point to a picture online and say, "Wouldn't it be nice if we could travel like that?" Or, "Imagine living in a place like this." I thought it was harmless daydreaming, so I'd nod and agree. But gradually the comments turned sharper. She'd see a couple online and mutter, "They look so happy, don't they?" Or, "I bet he takes her places and surprises her." It wasn't playful anymore. It was accusatory, as if she was measuring me against a standard I could never meet. I worked hard, I provided, I loved her the best way I knew how, but in her eyes it was never enough. One night, after a long day at work, I came home to find her sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone. Without looking up, she said, "Do you ever feel like you're stuck?" I asked what she meant, and she replied, "Like this is it, like this is all life has to offer." I told her no, I didn't feel that way, that I believed life was about building something meaningful over time. She sighed, shaking her head, as if my answer was proof that I didn't understand her. It wasn't an argument, but it left a heavy silence between us, the kind that lingers long after the conversation ends. The intimacy changed too, in ways that felt subtle but spoke volumes. Where she used to reach for my hand without thinking, now there was hesitation. Where she once curled against me at night, she now turned to the edge of the bed. The kisses grew shorter, the laughter less frequent. I told myself it was stress, that she was just going through a phase. But deep down, I knew something was shifting. I could feel the distance growing, even as we shared the same space. One of the clearest warning signs came during my birthday dinner the second year we lived together. I had made reservations at a nice restaurant, one she had mentioned wanting to try. I dressed up, bought a new shirt, and was excited for a night that was supposed to be special. But throughout the evening, she seemed distracted, her eyes flicking to her phone constantly. At one point I asked if everything was okay, and she shrugged, saying, "I just feel like I should be somewhere else tonight." It was like being punched in the chest. Here I was, celebrating my birthday with the person I loved, and she was telling me she'd rather be anywhere but there. I smiled through it, tried to salvage the night, but inside, something cracked. The warning signs weren't loud or dramatic. They were quiet, insidious. A sigh here, a sharp word there, a growing distance that felt harder to bridge with each passing day. I ignored them for as long as I could, holding on to the good times like they were a lifeline. But the truth was undeniable. Vanessa was slipping away, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't stop it. What I didn't know then was that the small cracks were only the beginning, and soon they would split wide open, changing everything I thought I knew about us. The problems didn't just appear suddenly. They grew like weeds in a neglected garden, small at first but spreading quickly until they choked everything we had planted together. After the warning signs, the tension between us became harder to ignore, and the cracks in our relationship widened into gaps I couldn't bridge no matter how hard I tried. What used to be simple conversations turned into arguments, and what used to be laughter turned into silence that pressed down on me every time I walked through the door. It was as if the home we had once filled with dreams was now just a battleground, where neither of us wanted to surrender, but neither of us wanted to leave either. The arguments started small, disputes about money, about chores, about how we spent our time, but they never stayed small. Every disagreement seemed to unravel into something bigger, pulling up old resentments and piling them onto new frustrations. I remember one evening when she accused me of not caring about her passions. She said I was too focused on my job, too caught up in the idea of stability to truly understand her. I reminded her of the art space I had set up for her in our apartment, the times I encouraged her to follow her dreams, but she waved it off as if none of it mattered. "You don't get it," she said, her voice sharp. "You're happy with boring, I'm not." Those words stung more than I admitted, because they made me question whether the life I had built, a life I thought was good, steady and loving, was something she saw as a prison. Her nights out became longer, her excuses thinner. She'd tell me she was with friends, but when I asked who, she grew defensive, accusing me of being controlling. I had never been the jealous type, but the secrecy gnawed at me. I'd wake up in the middle of the night and find her not in bed, scrolling on her phone in the living room, her face illuminated by the glow of the screen. When I asked who she was talking to, she'd roll her eyes and say, "Why do you always assume the worst?" But it wasn't assumption, it was instinct, the gut feeling that the woman I loved was drifting further into a world I wasn't allowed to enter. The financial strain added fuel to the fire. I was working long hours, taking on extra projects to cover our bills and save for the future, while she had quit her corporate job to focus on her art. At first, I supported the decision. I thought she deserved a chance to chase her dream. But months passed, and the only thing that seemed to grow was the pile of unpaid bills. I never wanted to hold it against her, but resentment crept in when I realized I was carrying the weight alone. She spent money carelessly, on clothes, on nights out, on supplies that collected dust in her art corner. When I tried to talk about it, she accused me of making her feel like a burden, of not believing in her. "You think your job makes you better than me?" She snapped one night, her voice filled with venom I hadn't heard before. I didn't think that, not at all, but it didn't matter what I said. Her mind was already made up. The emotional distance between us turned into physical distance. She stopped reaching for me at night, stopped holding my hand in public, stopped kissing me with the same passion she once had. When I asked her if something was wrong, she'd shrug and say she was tired. But tired became her permanent state. Tired of me, tired of us, tired of the life we had built. The warmth that had once been the center of our relationship was gone, replaced by cold indifference that cut deeper than anger ever could. One of the lowest points came during a family gathering. My parents had invited us over for dinner, something they did often, and they had gone out of their way to make Vanessa feel welcome, as they always did. But that evening she barely spoke, barely acknowledged anyone, her phone in her hand more than her fork. On the drive home, I asked why she had been so distant, and she exploded. "Because I don't fit with your family, Daniel. I don't fit in your small, predictable world. I'm suffocating." I drove in silence, my hands gripping the wheel, my chest heavy with the realization that what I offered, the very stability I thought she wanted, was the very thing she despised. It wasn't just the arguments or the distance. It was the constant feeling of walking on eggshells, never knowing which version of her I would face each day. Some mornings she was sweet and affectionate, as if nothing was wrong. Other days she was cold and irritable, snapping at me for leaving a dish in the sink or forgetting to buy her favorite snack. The inconsistency left me drained, constantly questioning what I was doing wrong, constantly trying to fix something I didn't break. I began to lose myself in the process. My friends noticed I stopped showing up to gatherings, too embarrassed to admit that things at home were falling apart. My coworkers noticed I was more distracted, more tired, carrying stress that I tried to hide. Even my parents asked if everything was okay, sensing something was off. But I always brushed it off with excuses, telling everyone we were just going through a phase. Deep down, though, I knew the phase was becoming our reality. The problems escalated until they consumed everything. Our conversations, our nights, our silence. I was no longer living in the relationship I had once cherished. I was surviving it. And yet I stayed, clinging to the memory of who we used to be, hoping that somehow, if I just held on long enough, we could find our way back. But love can't survive on hope alone, and ours was unraveling faster than I could hold the threads together. When you are deep inside a failing relationship, it's amazing how blind you can become to what is obvious to everyone else. For months, I convinced myself that things would get better, that if I worked harder, loved her more, gave her more space, or bent myself further, somehow the pieces would fall back into place. But I was wrong, and the people around me started to notice long before I had the courage to admit it. It began with subtle questions from my best friend Marcus, who had always been the kind of guy to read between the lines. One night, after dragging me out to grab a beer just to get me out of the apartment, he asked, "Man, are you okay? You look like you're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders." I brushed it off, of course, saying work was stressful, but he didn't let it go. "It's not work. I can tell. It's her, isn't it?" His words hit me harder than I expected, because just hearing someone else say it out loud forced me to confront the truth I'd been avoiding. A week later, my sister Emily came over to visit. She had always liked Vanessa in the beginning, always believed we balanced each other out. But even she could see how the balance had shifted. While Vanessa was out, she claimed she was meeting a friend for coffee, though I wasn't sure anymore. Emily sat me down on the couch and said, "Daniel, you're not yourself anymore. You look tired, unhappy. You used to laugh all the time, you used to have energy. Now it feels like you're walking through life with a shadow over you." I tried to defend Vanessa, tried to say she was just stressed or going through something, but Emily stopped me. "I'm not saying she's a bad person. I'm saying she's not good for you. There's a difference." Those words lingered in my mind long after she left, because they came from someone who had no reason to lie, no agenda, just love for me. The final straw of outside confirmation came from my parents. They had always been supportive, never the type to meddle in my relationships. But during a Sunday dinner at their house, my father pulled me aside while my mother was washing dishes. He had a way of being direct, never dressing up his words with unnecessary softness. "Son, I don't like what I'm seeing. You're fading. This isn't the man you were raised to be. You're bending so much you're about to break." I wanted to protest, to argue, but the look in his eyes told me he had seen something I couldn't deny anymore. My mother later added her own quiet voice of concern. saying she noticed how withdrawn I had become, how even my smile seemed forced. She didn't tell me what to do, but she reminded me of something important. Daniel, love should bring peace more often than it brings pain. That one sentence replayed in my head on loop for weeks. At first, I tried to ignore all of them, to insist to myself that they just didn't understand our relationship, that they only saw the bad days and not the good ones. But the truth was, the good days were few and far between, while the bad ones had become our constant reality. Their words weren't meant to tear me away from her. They were meant to remind me of who I used to be, of the man I had lost in my desperate attempt to save something that was clearly crumbling. The validation didn't stop there. Even my coworkers noticed. During lunch breaks, they'd casually comment, "Rough night again?" or "You seem drained, man." I laughed it off, but inside, I knew they weren't wrong. The stress was written all over me, and no matter how much I tried to mask it, people could see through. One coworker, Angela, who had been through a tough divorce herself, pulled me aside after a meeting. She told me, "I don't know the details, but I can tell you this. If you're losing yourself trying to keep someone else happy, that's not love, it's sacrifice, and the wrong kind." Hearing it from someone who had walked through the fire of a broken marriage carried more weight than I expected. Marcus became my sounding board through much of it. Late-night calls, long drives where I spilled everything that had been bottled up inside me. I told him about the distance, about her coldness, about how nothing I did seemed to be enough. He listened without judgment, but when I finished, he gave it to me straight. "Bro, you've got to stop killing yourself for someone who doesn't even see it. You're worth more than being her emotional punching bag. You deserve someone who appreciates you, not someone who drains you." His words burned because they were true, and deep down, I had known it all along. Slowly, all these voices, my sister, my parents, my friends, even coworkers, started to stitch together a reality I couldn't deny. They were like mirrors held up to me, reflecting the version of myself I had become. Hollow, weary, and constantly second-guessing. Each reflection chipped away at the illusion I had been clinging to, that somehow this was just a rough patch, that somehow things would get better if I endured a little longer. But the more I listened, the more I realized this wasn't a rough patch, it was the whole relationship. The most painful part of hearing all this validation was realizing how alone I had felt inside the relationship, and how supported I actually was outside of it. For months I thought no one could understand what I was going through, that no one could see the weight I was carrying. But they had seen it all along, even when I tried to hide it. They saw me disappearing piece by piece, and they loved me enough to call me out, even when I didn't want to hear it. In the quiet moments after those conversations, I began to replay my life with Vanessa in my mind, looking at it through their eyes instead of my own clouded vision. And the truth was undeniable. They were right. This wasn't love anymore, it was survival. And no matter how much I told myself I was staying for love, what I was really doing was staying out of fear. Fear of being alone, fear of starting over, fear of admitting failure. But the voices around me reminded me that failure wasn't walking away. Failure was losing myself completely just to stay in something that was already gone. Rock bottom doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It creeps in quietly, disguising itself as yet another ordinary argument, until suddenly you realize you've reached the place you swore you'd never go. For me, it came on a cold Tuesday evening, the kind where the city lights looked dull against the fog. I had come home early, hoping maybe we could share dinner together, maybe salvage some small fragment of what we once had. I walked through the door, carrying her favorite takeout, only to find her sitting on the couch with tears streaking her face. For a split second, I thought she'd been waiting for me, that maybe she was finally ready to talk, but instead, she looked at me with eyes that felt empty. Her words were simple, sharp, and unforgettable. "I'm not happy." She said it like it was the final line of a script she'd rehearsed over and over. My hands tightened around the bag of food and my heart sank. I asked, "What do you want me to do, Vanessa?" She didn't hesitate. "I don't know, but I can't keep pretending." That was the moment I knew. There was nothing left to fight for. In the hours that followed, silence filled the room like a heavy fog. I stared at the woman I had once built my world around and realized I didn't recognize her anymore. All the love, all the sacrifices, all the energy I had poured into us had drained into a bottomless well. And now, she was telling me outright what I had already known in my gut for months. Rock bottom wasn't her unhappiness. It was the realization that I was no longer enough to change it. Something inside me cracked wide open. I had always believed love was about endurance, about sticking it out through the storms. But endurance without reciprocity is just slow destruction. That night, I finally stopped lying to myself. The decision came suddenly, almost too simple after all the torment I had endured. I looked at her through the tears in her eyes and the distance in her voice, and I said, "If you're not happy with me, then I won't stand in your way, but I won't let you drag me down anymore either." She blinked, surprised by the firmness in my tone. Maybe she thought I'd beg, maybe she thought I'd promise to change again, but I was done being the only one trying. I stood up, walked into the bedroom, and began pulling clothes from the dresser. My hands were steady, my heart strangely calm, as if I had been preparing for this moment all along. Vanessa followed me, her voice wavering between anger and disbelief. "You're really leaving? Just like that?" I zipped my bag and met her gaze. "You said you're not happy. Fine. Then be unhappy without me. Now you can be miserable alone." It was harsh, maybe even cruel, but it was the truest thing I had ever said to her. The execution wasn't dramatic, though it felt monumental. I packed my things with the mechanical efficiency of someone who had rehearsed the motions in his mind countless times. Every shirt folded, every pair of shoes tucked away, felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. She hovered near the doorframe, sometimes crying, sometimes muttering insults under her breath, sometimes begging me to reconsider. But my resolve didn't waver. I wasn't leaving out of spite. I was leaving to survive. For months, I had been drowning in her unhappiness, trying to rescue her while losing myself in the process. That night, I chose to swim to the surface instead. When I closed the door behind me, the weight that lifted off my shoulders was almost physical. The cold air outside hit my face like a baptism, sharp and cleansing. I loaded my bags into the trunk of my car and sat behind the wheel, staring at the apartment window that had once been a symbol of our dreams. Now, it was nothing but a cage. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. Scared? Yes. Unsure of what came next, but free. The new beginning didn't happen overnight. The first weeks were filled with loneliness, with long stretches of silence that echoed louder than any argument. I stayed with Marcus for a while, grateful for his couch and his steady presence. He didn't press me for details. He just let me heal in my own time. Emily called me often, reminding me that I had a family who loved me, who wanted to see me whole again. Slowly, I rebuilt my routines. I went back to the gym, started cooking for myself, picked up books I had abandoned long ago. Each small act was like laying a brick on the path back to who I was before the relationship consumed me. And then came the peace. Not all at once, but gradually, like sunlight seeping through curtains in the morning. I realized I could breathe without waiting for the next argument. I could smile without wondering if it would be met with silence. I could dream about the future without feeling like I was dragging someone else's unwilling heart behind me. The quiet became comforting, instead of suffocating. The freedom to make choices for myself felt like a gift I had forgotten how to unwrap. Looking back now, I see that the relationship wasn't a waste, though it nearly destroyed me. It taught me the harshest but most valuable lesson. Love cannot thrive where respect is absent, and no amount of sacrifice can fill a void someone else refuses to address. I learned that leaving isn't weakness. It's strength. It's knowing you're worth enough to walk away from someone who doesn't see it. To anyone listening who has ever felt trapped in a cycle of giving and receiving nothing in return, know this: you don't have to stay. You don't have to shrink yourself to fit into someone else's unhappiness. Love should not be a battlefield where you are both the soldier and the casualty. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is pack your bag, walk out the door, and remind yourself that freedom is better than chains disguised as companionship. I thought losing her would break me. Instead, it saved me. And though the words I left her with might have sounded cold, they were the truth that set me free. Now you can be miserable alone, because I refuse to be miserable with you. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.